everybody. Welcome to the July 2023 edition of the Mayor's Monthly Video. I'm David Mitchell, and we are excited today to have with us State Representative Corley Ellis. Corley has agreed to give us a update on the recent 2023 legislative session, talk about some of the major legislation, and then we've had quite a few citizen questions and concerns that we're going to address today. One regarding a complaint about the Columbiana Water Board, speed limits, concern about traffic safety or unsafe traffic stops, concern about loud vehicles, and then also a discussion about yard sales and trade days. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the clicker over to Corley.
Thank you, Mayor, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to do is give a brief overview of our legislative session, which we just ended a few weeks ago. And I encourage people, if that prompts further questions or interest, always reach out to them. I'm always available for those questions and would welcome that opportunity to sit down with you. So we gavelled into our regular session on March 7th of this year. When we did, the governor immediately called us into a special session to discuss the ARPA funds, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, and it's the second round of federal money that has come down. The reason for the special session, as most of you will know, is that it allows you to concentrate on one single item, and in that case, it was that ARPA money, and it eliminates all other distractions of other bills. And so the importance of it, it was $1.06 billion. With the B, $1.06 billion that we had to allocate. If we did not, then that money goes back to the federal government. And furthermore, if we misallocate and spend it in a way that the federal government doesn't approve, then we have to reimburse the federal government. So it's imperative that we spend that money and spend it correctly. In that, so it's $1.06 billion, as I said. This second round, we had a little more flexibility on how we could spend that money. And so infrastructure was one of the things that the feds allow us to spend it on this time. So we were able to allocate $400 million to water and sewer projects that will trickle down to cities, hopefully cities like Columbiana and counties, to do much needed infrastructure improvements. There was $339 million that went to COVID-related healthcare costs. So COVID, it's no big secret, did a number on a lot of hospitals, put a lot of them in a bind, and we're in a situation where rural hospitals especially are having to close their doors. So hopefully with this allocation of money, it will allow a lot of the rural hospitals and other hospitals to remain open so all Alabamians have access to good quality health care. $260 million went to expand broadband internet and high-speed internet to areas that are underserved and unserved areas, and it's absolutely critical in everyday life now, especially and most importantly in the education of our school kids. And so proud to spend that money and hopefully get some internet to the people who need it.
So I just want to say that Columbiana, through the first tranche of ARPA funds, got $2.25 million as far as to upgrade our sewer treatment plant here in Columbiana. And also recently through Spectrum Charter Communications, who received a grant money, they are making about an $18 million investment in the area, not just Columbiana, in high-speed internet access. I just wanted to pass that on. So some of the proceeds and how it trickles down to us.
And thank you for that, Mayor, because it's always good to see the money when it actually, where the rubber meets the road, when it actually gets spent. And so hopefully the second round we'll be able to get some more of that money for different projects. Another $55 million went to grant programs for food banks and housing assistance. COVID left a lot of people in a bind and unemployed, having trouble keeping housing and things. So a lot of that money will go to food banks. With that, I'll jump back into our regular session. So after we're done with the special session, we adjourned out of it and went right back into our regular session. And most of you probably know that Alabama is one of just a handful of states that has a bifurcated budget. We have two budgets, one that covers all education, K-12, even higher education, and then we have a general fund that that handles everything outside of that, Medicaid, prisons, roads, and that such, everything that's not educated related. So we're only one of just a few states that do it that way. Our Education Trust Fund Committee, which I'm honored and privileged to be able to serve on, we allocated a record $8.8 billion. That's the largest we've ever had in the state of Alabama. It's the most we've ever spent on education. That's a $537 million increase from the previous year. That's a 6.5% increase. I'd be remiss if I did not say that I think our economy is somewhat falsely propped up with all the federal COVID money that has trickled down to individuals. We go out and spend that money. Typically, that increases our sales tax, which goes directly into the Education Trust Fund. So having said that, we had a huge surplus. We had $2.8 billion of excess money where revenues exceeded our expectations. Good problem to have, but again, it makes me nervous to spend it all. I'm proud to say that we put $500 million in a rainy day account just because we're starting to see revenues drop in the economy with inflation and interest rates doing what they're doing. Fully expect a little dip in that. So we've got $500 million that we can access before we have to make any cuts or go into any kind of proration or even talk about proration. So I'm proud of that. We did supplemental allocation, which is typically one-time money of that $2.8 billion, and that went to various schools for projects and universities for projects and such. So we're very proud of that budget. The general fund budget, also the largest in Alabama history, was $3 billion, and that was a 6% increase over the previous year. We did a supplemental allocation out of that of $208 million in it, and one thing we were able to do is give a 2% much needed and much deserved pay raise to our state employees. Another thing that we did that you've seen in the news is a tax rebate of $150 per individual, $300 if you're filing jointly. That's $393 million that'll go back to the hardworking men and women of the state of Alabama. We'll probably start seeing those checks go out in November. So look for those. Another thing we did was the grocery sales tax. As you know, state of Alabama is one of a few that charges sales tax on groceries. That's 4%. We passed a bill that drops that to 3% this September. Next September, assuming that the revenues continue to come in good, that'll reduce another 1% down to 2%. And of course, the hope is that eventually we'll be able to eliminate that entirely. Another thing we were able to do, and this was a bipartisan effort here, is to remove the state tax on overtime pay. It was 5%. That will start January 1st of 2024. And what that does in a time where employers are having a hard time filling jobs and keeping people working, it just hopefully motivates people to work a little overtime, puts a little more money in their pocket, and hopefully that will benefit the workers and the employers. We passed fentanyl legislation. You'd have to live under a rock not to know that there's a fentanyl crisis in our country, not just our state, but certainly in our state as well. We passed legislation that targets dealers and traffickers and also makes it safer for our first responders. And so we're very proud of that legislation. We passed a bill that requires financial literacy, some level of financial literacy for our high school graduates as they graduate. A lot of our kids graduate, either go to college or go to the real world, and they don't have a good grasp of how to manage a checkbook, how to manage a new credit card that they get, and it gets them in trouble oftentimes. So now there'll be a requirement for a level of that financial literacy. One that I'm very proud of is we passed another bill that will allow leave time for adoptive parents. As you know, parents of newborn kids, they're able to take a certain amount of time off to get acclimated to the new role as a parent and get the kid acclimated. Now we have extended that to adoptive parents as well. They'll have that same right. A big one that a lot of people contacted me about back in COVID was the healthcare visitation rights for families. During COVID, there were a lot of families members that were in hospitals, and their family members couldn't get in to see them. In a time where you absolutely have to take an active role in your healthcare and the decisions made in your healthcare, it's imperative to have family members there to help you make those decisions. So now we've passed a bill that in the state of Alabama, you always have access to those family members that can help you make those critical decisions. Another one that I worked with the mayor on was we were able to pass a local bill that just affected Columbiana, that allowed the city of Columbiana through resolution to the mayor and the city council to do an entertainment district with just simply one ABC license to sell alcohol. Previously, it had to be 4 ABC license, and which Columbiana has and was able to act on. But the problem is, if one of those businesses go out of business, then you have to suspend your entertainment district after you spend all the time and energy into it. So we'll be able to keep that entertainment district, which is very important to us, a downtown area. Now, as a small city, we'll be able to have the same benefits that the larger ones do. And every thriving downtown area has one of those entertainment districts. And finally, I'll close with this. We passed a distracted driving bill that has been attempted for several years. I think as long as I've been in the legislature. So we did finally pass a bill that makes it illegal to hold your cell phone going down the road. Now, you can pick up your cell phone to dial, to look at the map, to get directions, to make your phone call. You just simply cannot sit there and scroll Instagram going down the road. And so I'm proud of that one. That was a tough one to get passed. Had a lot of controversy around it, but at the end of the day, it will save lives. So I'm very proud of that. But again, I'll close by saying, if this has prompted any questions, concerns, thoughts, I always recommend and welcome people to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to sit down with you and chat about any concerns anybody may have. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mayor.
You bet. Well, thanks for being here.
Thank
So
you.
I'd like to thank Representative Ellis for coming and talking with us today. I think a lot of stuff goes on in those legislative sessions, and even though you might see snippets of it in the news, oftentimes you don't understand really what happened and how it impacts us. So I thought it was great for you to come down and talk to us and let us know how it affects everybody here in Columbiana. So appreciate you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, I want to thank Corley Ellis again. So now let's get to the questions and issues and concerns that have been expressed by folks here in Columbiana. The first one's a complaint against Columbiana Water Board, and I talked about this briefly in the last monthly video, but I had just received the complaint, hadn't had a chance to investigate, so I just kind of wanted to give you an update. But just as a recap, the thing that I want to remind people of is Columbiana Water Board is a separate legal entity. It's not part of the city of Columbiana. Neither I or any department head or council person for the city of Columbiana has any authority or control over the Columbiana Water Board. You do get a consolidated bill from the Columbiana Water Board, which includes the sewer, which does belong to the city of Columbiana, and the garbage. But the city of Columbiana has an agreement with the water board, pays them to do that billing for, so it's really a matter of convenience. But here's what the allegation was, and here's what the investigation turned up. So the allegation was that someone had an issue with their billing. They called the Columbiana Water Board, and they alleged that the treatment that they received from the person on the phone was rude, unprofessional, it was improper, and then also when they discussed the issue with management, they felt like management didn't take appropriate action against the individual or to address the issue. So to investigate this, I called the Columbiana Water Board. I talked to their management. I said, do you have recordings or videos of any of this activity? Well, there is no recording of the telephone conversation. So really wasn't able to draw any conclusions about the allegation, what was said. The parties basically, as is often the case, have different versions of the event. People see things through different prisms, and so what one person heard might be different from what the other person heard, and so couldn't really draw any conclusions from that simply because I had two different stories. But we did have a security video because after the telephone call, the individual who lodged a complaint had gone to the water board to try to address the issue and take care of it in person. Now, there was no video on the security, or excuse me, no audio on the security video, but we did see the interaction between the customer and the Columbiana Water Board, and it did not depict an adversarial interaction at all. In fact, there was smiling and laughing and seemed to be cordial conversation as far as that. There was some other allegations made, and those allegations were made, I think, primarily because, and I'm not going to go into what they were, but they were based on assumptions. And oftentimes we know what they say about assumptions, they can get you into trouble. So when we looked into that, we found that particular allegation was unfounded. But still, I always see these as a learning opportunity. So I talked to the members of the water board, I talked to the management and said, hey, here's an opportunity to have a discussion with your team about how to improve your interaction with customers, particularly customers who might be dissatisfied. So hopefully they say they've done that, and hopefully we will minimize any of these types of issues going forward. All right, so the next one is I had a citizen who has been concerned about the speed limit on the Highway 25 that runs between where Brown's Lumber is and basically the animal clinic, a lot of heavy truck traffic. And we have some retirement communities and people pulling out on the road while other people are trying to pass these trucks, and it's dangerous. I started addressing this issue back in 2021, had a meeting with ALDOT. I had a couple of meetings with ALDOT and eventually meeting with the director of the Alabama Department of Transportation in 2022. But so the concern was the striping on the road, and so that's being addressed because ALDOT is repaving Highway 25 from Calera all the way to the animal clinic here in Columbiana. And so that's in process, and you're going to see the new pavement and new striping very soon. But as far as the request to reduce the speed limit, that's a product of a traffic study that ALDOT, and they have a specific process, and they denied the request to reduce the speed limit on that portion of Highway 25. And there was someone else who had asked for on Highway 25 near the middle school at the intersection of Highway 25 and Depot Street and Joinertown Road to see if there couldn't be a traffic signal put there. And they did a study on that and also denied the traffic signal. On the gray box on the right, you can see excerpts from the letter. And the key thing that they used was the 85th percentile speed at these locations, which was already significantly higher than the posted speeds. And their recommendation was further enforcement of current speed limits as recommended in lieu of speed limit reductions. I have all kinds of issues and problems with that. I'm kind of a data geek and get into statistics, and I think that one statistic of the 85th percentile is not necessarily the right one telling the whole story. I also think that suggesting that the solution is to write more tickets, especially in lieu of the Brookside, Alabama issue, and also the fact that they tell me in one breath that to enforce the speed, and then the next breath the director of ALDOT told me, he says, well, you're only wanting to do this so you can write more tickets. So it just kind of didn't make any sense to me, but we're still going to try to fight this battle, if you will, and I hope that we can have some success in the future. At the same time, we asked for a speed reduction on Highway 70, particularly in the area between the intersection of 70 and County Road 26. As it comes into Columbiana, it's a lot high traffic. We've got new housing developments. We have a school. We have lots of activity in that area. Felt like it would be a good idea to reduce the speed limit there. That was also denied based on the traffic study. There is some inconsistency, in my opinion, between speed limits on county roads and state roads. And that was a concern because these state roads like 47 and 26 that come into Columbiana, they reduce the speed limit as you're coming into town to 45, and on 47 and from Chelsea, it's reduced in part down to 35 miles per hour, whereas the state of Alabama leaves the speed limit at 55 and then reduces it to 50 and doesn't reduce it down to 45, which is where I wanted it to go, until you get almost to the intersection of 70 and 25. So I feel like there's a little inconsistency there, but the same way we don't have control over speed limits on state highways, we also don't have control on county roads. In fact, Senator Steve Livingston this session sponsored and passed a bill that says municipalities like Columbiana may not set speed limits on county maintained streets within their corporate limits. I think that was always the case. I'm not sure what was the back story behind this particular legislation, but it just reinforces the fact that when people come to me and say, hey, 35 is too slow on Highway 47, I can't change that. That's up to Shelby County to be able to do that. Okay, so so you can see they also in their letter said that the intersection on Highway 25 didn't meet the requirements for a traffic signal. And one other thing that I'd asked them to do, since they were paving anyway, was to put in a right turn lane, and that might help ease some of the traffic burden, and they recommend a traffic circle instead of that. So didn't get very far on this particular issue, but we'll keep working it and see what we can do. Maybe we can ask State Representative Ellis to help us address this particular issue. Okay, received a letter from a concerned citizen. This was an anonymous letter. This was not through the city website. That basically says, on several occasions, your officers have made traffic stops that compromise safety of themselves and others. And then this statement that I don't quite understand says, your professionalism and reputation is at stake. Now, this letter was addressed to myself and also to Chief Bowers. I'm not going to address the professionalism and reputation, but I will say this. The concern about the safety of the officers during traffic stops is a legitimate concern. Traffic stops around the country and in Alabama are a leading cause of law enforcement officer injuries and deaths. Now, some of that is due to bypassing traffic and people being hit by, officers being hit by vehicles, and the other part of it is oftentimes you have a criminal who might be armed and dangerous, and we have a lot of deaths and injuries as a result of that. So it's a very dangerous situation in making a traffic stop. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about is the Alabama move over law. And basically on a 2-lane road, what that move over law reads, it says the driver shall move as far away from the law enforcement vehicle or emergency vehicle as possible, but within his or her lane. So the person who sent this letter sent these photographs, and you can see there's a crease in there where it was folded in the envelope. But this is Highway 47 on the top photo, and what you see there is this is the area where the speed limit changes right at the spot where it changes from 35 to 45. So you can see the vehicle ahead of the person who took this photograph. It has moved over into the other lane. You're not supposed to do that. The assumption is that you shouldn't stop these people in a curve. I've driven this a couple of times, and I can tell you from my vehicle, which is not a truck, you can see oncoming traffic around that curve. So I'm sure that car would not have moved over in the other lane if they didn't feel it was close, if it wasn't safe. But still, it's something to be mindful of. The other thing is the law says that you should reduce your speed at least 15 miles per hour. And so in this particular area where this picture was taken through the windshield, that vehicle is approximately a beam where the 45 mile per hour speed limit starts. So prior to that, the speed limit is 35. So if a driver sees that as they're approaching the vehicle, they should slow 15 miles per hour, which would take them down to 20, and probably make it safe to stay in your lane and move by the officer who's got somebody pulled over. So there's another picture. I'll talk about this, another incident below. And frankly, there's nothing really wrong or incorrect in either one of these. The officers are trained that when they pull a vehicle over, that they should do so as soon as they deem that it's safe to do that. The concerned citizen suggests that the officer should, when somebody stops, direct them to move to a safer or a different location if it's not an ideal location. And that is actually frowned upon by the police department, because if you have a criminal or a perpetrator in there, you're giving them the opportunity, obviously, to escape once you're out of your vehicle and you ask them to leave. And again, at the same time, exposing yourself to lots of other risks. So generally, once the vehicle is pulled over, you kind of are where you are. So you have to conduct that traffic stop as safely as you can possibly be. In the lower photograph, what happened is the police officers pulled somebody over for an expired license plate. They pulled into the area behind the County Community Services business building, and that's essentially the road that runs from College Street in front of the public library. And so you can see there's a parking lot behind the building, and so the vehicle that was pulled over tried to pull over as far as they could where those cars were parked, and then the police officers pulled up behind them. Why are there two police cars there? Well, that happens because we have a small police force and most of our officers are patrolling alone. And so oftentimes, whenever possible, and there's a vehicle pulled over, if there's another officer in the area, they come by just to support for safety reasons. So in both of these photographs, there's really nothing wrong or incorrect. Are there things that could be done better? Possibly. The most unsafe thing done in both of these vehicles is, and you just heard about the law that was recently passed by the legislature, is that the driver of this vehicle is using their phone to take a photograph while they're moving. So that's clearly something that you shouldn't be done. And, you know, like I said, we always take everything as an opportunity to learn and from it. There is some suggestion in law enforcement these days that when an officer approaches a vehicle after a traffic stop, that they should probably pull over on or approach on the right side, the passenger side, if it is safe to do so. And you can take a look in this picture on Highway 47. We have an unsmooth shoulder. It's rocky, there's gravel, it's not level. And so an officer could lose their footing approaching on that right side of the vehicle. So the car that was pulled over pulled off the road completely. The police officer pulled completely behind them. And again, I think had it been a vehicle come up there and they slowed to 20 miles per hour as the law required, certainly everything would have been safe for everybody involved. In this case, the vehicle pulled far enough over so it wasn't a hazard for the officer. And then in the other position, it's tight quarters, but it's essentially a parking lot. So they were not on a busy road as far as that's concerned. We'll take it. I've discussed it with the chief. They will discuss it in their training sessions, and they'll discuss things that they could have done differently to possibly do better. Okay, so now another question about loud noise. Why does the police department not do something about loud exhaust on trucks and cars? And then the parenthetical that I don't understand completely, because they never leave the downtown area. I'm not sure if they're saying because the trucks never leave the downtown area, the loud vehicles, or if they're saying the police department never leave the downtown area. Well, clearly the previous chart shows you that with the police department out there on Highway 47, so that's clearly not the case. So bottom line up front, what are we going to do? We're going to make this a discussion at our next city council meeting. It's going to put it on the agenda about potentially having an ordinance for loud vehicles, which we don't have. So I hope the citizen who wrote this can attend. And if he wants to have a discussion or speak at that, we can add him to the agenda. So the next council meeting from the time this is being recorded is going to be the 11th of July, Tuesday evening, 6 o'clock. I'm going to put it in this video, so we're doing that now. And these are all bullets from my response via email to this individual. I'm going to address it in the August Bugler article, and it's time for me to start writing that. Now, you have to write it about a month in advance, so I'm writing it now. You'll see it in August. And then, if the council should choose to move forward and create an ordinance for loud trucks and cars, We need to talk about a public awareness campaign. I put some signs down there from another city of what they've done, and we'll try to get some coverage in the local media, and we'll also develop a strategy for the police department to enforce it. So now sort of let me give you the disclaimers and some of the challenges associated with this. We don't have a noise ordinance for loud vehicles. We do have a noise ordinance, but it addresses only loud music, okay? So the city council would have to adopt an ordinance for loud vehicles. But they don't necessarily have to, because the state has a law, it's the Alabama Code Title 32, that governs loud vehicles. And basically it just says excessive or unusual noise is illegal, okay? And the Columbiana Police Department, or any law enforcement agency in the state of Alabama for that matter, has the ability to enforce that particular law in the city of Columbiana or anywhere else in the state. So the challenges are, is first, the police department has to catch them in the act. We're small, we're stretched thin, we only have, 2 or 3 patrol officers at a time, so being at the right place at the right time is difficult. And one of the other challenges is the law is not specific as to what is excessive or unusual noise. And so if it's challenged in court, and I understand this has happened, it might be difficult to enforce the law. Having said that, some Alabama cities have adopted more specific ordinances, and below is an excerpt from Huntsville's, and it goes into decimal levels for motorcycles, for vehicles under a certain weight, over a certain weight. And so the bottom line is, in order to be able to enforce that ordinance, you might have to have a decibel meter, you might have to have scales, you got to be in the right place at the right time. But really, really challenging to be able to enforce it. But we're going to discuss it at our council meeting. We're going to see what we can do to come up with something that's going to help try to deal with this issue, because it is a real issue. I've heard it. My wife frankly complains about loud vehicles all the time. So maybe that will help us all out. Okay, and the last thing, this just really came up, and this is also going to be discussed at the next council meeting. I'm briefly going to discover that, and that's rules and regulations regarding yard sales, and then whether or not we would want to bring back Columbiana Trade Days. So just real quick, the things on yard sales and rummage sales, are they governed by an ordinance? Well, we don't have an ordinance in Columbiana for yard sales per se, but we do have ordinances for zoning and for licenses and permits. And you do require a permit for a yard sale, but you don't require a business license. And the question is, could you have a yard sale on commercial property? And that's something that we'll discuss at the council meeting. We have been, through being sponsored by Main Street Alabama for the last couple of years, we've been conducting, in lieu of the Columbiana Trade Days, a farmer's market that complies with the Department of Agriculture, where we are selling produce that is grown by local farmers, and they have to have a grower's certificate that is sanctioned by the Agricultural Department to be able to sell their products at the farmer's market. Some other things that we would need to think about is the location. Is it a public purpose? Does it support economic development? Versus Columbiana Trade Days, which is the same things that we would need to talk about. So I'm going to wait until after the council meeting. I'll come back and try to close this issue out at the next mayor's monthly meeting, but those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. So that sort of wraps us up. Again, I want to thank State Representative Ellis for coming by, and you guys keep those cards and letters coming in, and we'll see you next month.